5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hello everybody, it's Silvia. Welcome back to the TBR Diaries. I hope you're doing good. Today's video, as you can tell from the title, is going to be some creepy, spooky horror book recommendations. I know Halloween has been and gone, but for me, and I'm sure for a lot of you, it is always spooky season in my heart. The days are still getting colder, the nights are still getting longer and darker, so there is still plenty of time for some horror, scary books to be read. I am going to get straight into it with an author that you should probably not be surprised to see from me, and that is Mira Grant. Mira Grant is a pen name for Shauna Maguire. She writes horror books under that pen name, and I am a huge fan of these books. The first book I'm going to talk about is Into the Drowning Deep. In this book, we follow a group of scientists on an expedition in the Mariana Trench. They are investigating claims of killer mermaids following a hoax documentary a few years previously in which everybody died and the only thing that survived was footage of these mermaids. There's plenty of people who say it was fake, who say it was a hoax, but there are several people who think that these mermaids are not only plausible but real. The team is mostly made up of scientists who are seeing this as an opportunity to do research out in the Mariana Trench that is fully funded, and they don't necessarily believe that these mermaids exist. And there are also some other characters because this second expedition is also being filmed as the capitalist overlords cannot seem to help themselves. This book also features an autistic lesbian main character, and therefore we have to support it because we love to see it. I'm going to leave it there because I know I've talked about this book several times before, but in my eyes this book is required reading, partly because I desperately want to read a sequel, and if more people read it, the more chance she's going to get to write it. I also want to talk about the Parasite series from Mira Grant. This is a trilogy. This is set in a version of society where people willingly coexist with their own personalised, genetically engineered tapeworm living inside them that keeps them healthy by boosting their immune system, by secreting drugs, all that kind of thing. I think you can see the ways this might go terribly wrong. This series adds a really interesting perspective by using the medical system and the pharmacology system as a vehicle for the mystery surrounding our main character, who was saved by her tapeworm a few years previously in what otherwise would have been a fatal accident. And so she has regular visits to Simbagen is the name of the science people. She regularly visits them to have her and her tapeworm monitored. The main hook in this book is that these parasites want their own lives and they will do anything to get them. This is perfect if you want a zombie story with a bit of a twist. Mira Grant has also written several novellas, which I would highly recommend if you want to dip your toe into her writing and see if you like it. Rolling in the Deep is the events prior to Into the Drowning Deep, following the initial fatal expedition where everybody gets murdered by killer mermaids. Spoilers. Kingdom of Needle and Bone is another one I've read. I think that is a bit of an anti-vaxxer cautionary tale, potentially. I might be wrong in my remembering of that, but it features a plague, in case you're not sick of the real life plague. And I also recently read Square Cubed, which is a space physics weirdness horrors beyond the comprehension of man kind of a story, which I recently spoke about in my wrap-up. Moving on from the Mira Grant installment to the Caitlin Starling installment, The Luminous Dead. I read this last year. I loved it. I was so scared. I was properly on the edge of my seat. I had to keep reading to figure out what happened. This book properly scared me. Having said that, not much really happens in this book, which maybe actually is why it's so effectively scary, but this is a sci-fi setting. We're set on another planet with these underground cave systems full of things that can probably kill you and some kind of creature that you definitely don't want to meet because it definitely would kill you. We start this book with our main character about to go on an underground exploratory mission, which terrifying, but should be fine because she is supposed to have a whole team of people sort of topside who can monitor her, who can communicate with her via her fancy high-tech sci-fi suit. However, this whole team of people turns out to be only one woman who has not been entirely honest about her reasons for wanting this particular underground cave network explored. I would recommend this book if you want morally bankrupt queer women and a really truly claustrophobic underground setting. This book also has one of the coolest maps that I've ever seen in a book. So this is the underground cave system that she explores, and was a very cool addition to a book. I love a map in a book, and this is quite an interesting spin on that. But anyway, moving swiftly on to Yellow Jessamine, which I have recently spoken about quite a lot. This also features a morally bankrupt queer woman who finds herself and her city trapped in her own web of poisonous secrets. This is much more gothic, whereas The Luminous Dead is a sci-fi setting. This is what I think of as a much more like traditionally gothic setting, complete with a big old house. Sticking to the gothic books, this is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is set in 1950s Mexico, and we follow Noemi, who is going to stay at High Place following letters from her recently wed cousin begging her to help her. So she goes to stay in her new home with her cousin's new family. This is a post-colonial Gothic story, and one thing that I really loved about this book was the sort of traditional Gothic fog-shrouded manner that you see in a lot of books has so much character and presence in this story. It is almost like a character in and of itself, and the real life horrors of colonialism and white supremacy and xenophobia have permeated this house, and that really bring the house to life and add this really insidious setting for the story to take place. I would recommend this if you want a protagonist who is very much not a damsel in distress, and if you want some creepy like mold, fungus, plant stuff going on. There's quite a lot of that. That is quite a prominent thread throughout this story, and I enjoyed that for some reason. I'm also going to recommend The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson. In this book, we follow a young woman who lives in a puritanical cult of a society, and one day ends up having to go into the creepy forbidden forest, because there's always a creepy forbidden forest, and while she's in there she finds her dead mother's diary. She learns that her mother had previously not only found sanctuary in said creepy forbidden forest, but also that while she was in there she had consorted with the witches, who had previously been driven out of town by the church. Our main character fights the forces of evil, which in this book is organised religion, with other forces of evil, including but not limited to a blood plague, to try and change this society for the better. I would absolutely recommend if you want some biblical paranormal horror vibes. I've not read anything quite like this. If you know of anything, please recommend it to me in the comments. And I think there is a sequel planned for this, but the author has not yet been able to write it. But whenever that appears, I will absolutely be picking it up. While I was grabbing books, I also came across my copy of The Woman in Black by Susan Hill. This is, I feel like if you want some classic Gothic horror, this will do it for you. This is also a short book. This features a lawyer who has to go to an isolated, creepy house on the moors that occasionally get cut off by the flood water or the rising tide. I can't quite remember. And this really scared me when I was reading it. I had to read it with the lights on with somebody else in the room. I am a bit of a baby, so, you know, take that with a pinch of salt, but I would also really recommend this. And the cover, I love this copy, this like mass market that I have, but like, she's creepy. She's creepy. There was a graveyard in this. I might be getting mixed up with the movie, but like creepy children, maybe, ghosts, graveyards, and a isolated house. What more could you want? So there we have some creepy, spooky horror recommendations. Let me know if you've read any of these. Let me know if you have recommendations for me based off these books. I quite like to be scared, but I quite like to not be too realistically scared, if that makes any sense. But you know, I'm always looking to add books to my TBR, so let me know. And I am going to leave it there. I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.